What is up, guys? What is up, man? And I didn't have my intro video today, so I'm gonna go ahead and kick this off by just saying, man, I apologize for yesterday. Had some power issues yesterday in terms of Wi-Fi and things like that. So a 1 day late mailbag, but I want to do a condensed mailbag today. Listen, check me out on All Script or Scotty's channel at 6 o'clock tonight. So in about 55 minutes, I'll be on that channel. We are previewing FAMU Southeastern Louisiana for the first round of the FCS playoffs on his channel. We're breaking down some film, going over matchups, things like that. So make sure to check that out. Also, as I'm going to knock out some announcements as people get in here. I also was on the Intel podcast this week. Go to my Instagram. The link is in my story. We talked to FCS playoffs. We talked some Power Five college football playoff. We talked to SWAC. We talked a lot of stuff, and it was a great interview. Shout out to the Intel podcast for having me on. And I'm also going to go ahead and link it in the description after this video is posted, man. So I appreciate y'all tuning in. And I want to give a shout out to my guy Steve, man, for becoming a member. I definitely appreciate y'all for that. But man, so let's go ahead and start knocking out some topics, and y'all can start commenting some of your questions that you wanted to have on the mailbag. But we're gonna kick it off. Everyone knows this weekend is the first round of the FCS playoffs this weekend. They kick off on Saturday. We got games all day long. It's a great weekend of football, man. If you're a college football fan, between rivalry week, between the Bayou Classic, between the FCS playoffs, there is a lot of great football this weekend that you should tune into. Listen, no reason for you not to be watching football this weekend. Steve said, at FAMU, we love being underdogs, less expectations. We're going to shock the world. Man, listen, there's a lot of people riding with y'all, a lot of people. But the first topic today, man, this was submitted on Twitter, man. Thank you for everyone submitting questions. But they was asked, who are my favorites for the FCS title right now? And for me, there goes multiple parts into this. One, it depends on the bracket. There's some teams that got a very unlucky draw, like a Sacramento State and a Villanova. I feel like they have a pretty tough region. Also, I think Sam Houston has a tough region as well. Same with James Madison. But for me, looking at the bracket, I would say number one, I really do think North Dakota State has a great shot at winning the title this year. That would probably be my number one favorite. You look at how well that defense was playing down the stretch this season, and also you have Quincy Patterson at quarterback, who's not going to be afraid at the moment. And that program really and truly, that program for me knows how to win. It's built into the culture of that program that it's national championship or bust at North Dakota State. Last year, losing a bit early in the playoffs really seemed to hurt them. So for me, I had North Dakota State with an easier path. They get two conference opponents and facing off in the first round. And so they get a known opponent in that second round. Then you look in the other side of the bracket, you have a Kennesaw State and just some other in ETSU that I just don't think match up very well with the defense that North Dakota State's going to bring. I don't think the option attack of Kennesaw is going to work very well against the North Dakota State. And I just don't think an ETSU has played the level of competition to be ready to face a North Dakota State in the playoffs. So for me, I think North Dakota State is a shoe-in for the semifinals, in my opinion. And then also they get the winner of a James Madison, Eastern Washington, a Montana, that brutal bottom right part of the bracket. And I think whoever comes out of that part of the bracket is going to be really banged up. I think that part of the bracket is brutal. UNI, Eastern Washington, James Madison. I mean, they have so many powerhouse teams in that side of the bracket that I just don't know if they're going to have enough gas in the tank to get all the way there. So I would say that's why North Dakota State would be my favorite. The second would probably be Sam Houston. When you look at Sam Houston, man, everyone made a big fuss about their schedule. It was still like top 60 in the country. And, it wasn't that just they didn't play anybody, but they were beating people to death. Outside of Stephen F. Austin, they beat everyone else by 14 or more points. They were outscoring opponents on the season like 42 points per game to like 14. And it just never was close. and you have all the starters that already know what it takes to get to the title game and win. They're all back and they all believe that they can get to the title game and they know what it's going to take. And so for me, Sam Houston is going to have a great shot. And then if I had to pick an underdog, man, this might surprise some of you guys. I'm going with South Dakota State. And I know you're like, man, Zach, they were playing atrocious down the stretch of the regular season. Listen, they got a big break in terms of their bracket. They get UC Davis the first round. I think they're better than UC Davis. And then they get Sacramento State. That's the Big Sky champion, but Sacramento State didn't have to play Montana State, Eastern Washington, so they haven't really been battle tested. And I think South Dakota State has a great shot at winning that game. And then I still think they have a great shot against Villanova. Now, that's not going to be a pushover game, but I still think South Dakota State matches up very well with their side of the bracket. It's a bunch of teams that, I feel like don't have that level of physicality that South Dakota State has. And I don't think you can discount, the 6-year senior and Chris Duncan at quarterback. He's done it at Sanford. He was committed to FAMU. He went to South Dakota State to win a championship. He came on the show and told me he went to South Dakota State because he saw them play in the national title and he wanted to be the quarterback to bring them a national title. So I really think South Dakota State shock some people and make it to the semifinals. So those are probably my top three right now in terms of favorites for the FCS title. Steve here said Sam Houston over James Madison. That's a good pick, man. That is definitely a good pick. I can see that. Listen, if James Madison comes out of that, bottom part of the bracket, it's going to be a problem. Eastern Washington has a deadly bracket. Yeah, man, that's by far the hardest part of the bracket is that Eastern Washington, Montana, UNI, James Madison. They have a brutal part of the bracket. They beat Colorado State. Yeah, South Dakota State beat Colorado State by like 20. And I mean, it really and truly was impressive how they absolutely dominated an FBS team on the road early in the season. Jordan here, man, with the question, Blue. Is James Madison offense good? Yeah, man. I think they're balanced, and that's what gives a lot of teams problems. They have two running backs that are former All Americans. Percy is by far the best running back on that roster, and last year, he outside of Pierre Strong at South Dakota State, he was probably the second best running back in FCS. Their quarterback play at times have been inconsistent, Jordan. But for me overall, I think that what I would say about their offense is good enough to win a national title because their defense is so good. Where James Madison is going to win games, man, is really at the line of scrimmage. Their offensive line and defensive line are just big, physical, nasty, and they're going to win the line of scrimmage a lot of times. And that's why their rushing attack is so efficient, so physical, and that's where they beat you. They're just going to beat you down. And the only team that's really been able to compete with them at all was Villanova 1 week. And still going back and watching that game, I thought it possibly could be a fluke. Right now, if they face off again, I wouldn't trust Villanova to win that game. But when you look at their depth at running back, their experience at quarterback, I really do think, Jordan, that James Madison offense is really, really good, and I don't think they've hit their ceiling. I still think there's been times where they've been inconsistent in terms of the passing attack, but their rushing attack is absolutely a real problem up there in James Madison. Steve, Montana State's running back is nice too. Listen, Montana State's a sneaky team. For me, but listen, for me with that Montana State team, they're in Sam Houston's bracket, and I feel like they can get to that game. And what Montana State brings is they've been through, I mean, the fire to say the least, Steve. I mean, they've had to go through Montana, they had to go through Eastern Washington, which they beat. They had to play the best of the best in the Big Sky, and so they are battle tested all the way through and through, which is something that I don't think you could say about a Sam Houston State. So maybe they're ready for that moment. And if there's anybody in before like the semifinals that can beat Sam Houston State, I absolutely think it's Montana State because of their balance and their dynamic offense. Um, Let's see. Philip said, "What do you think about Harsin leaving Auburn for Washington?" I think it was. Listen, if Brian Harsin leaves Auburn for Washington, I'll be shocked. But he is a West Coast guy, and I can see him potentially wanting to go back out there. But I would have a tough time seeing that happen after just one season at Auburn. But you never know, man. The coaching cycle is wild. James Franklin just signed an extension. Luke Fickell is about to sign an extension. So the coaching candidates are falling by the wayside, and someone's going to have them. So it could be a possibility that Washington is vetting him, though. The last time I heard is that they are going to invite Brian Harsin for an interview out there in Seattle. So that's going to be interesting to watch, especially if Auburn gets their doors blown off by Alabama this weekend. Walter Harmon said Missouri Valley and Big Sky conferences have been super physical this year more than ever. The healthiest team from either conference can compete for it all, not discounting the Southland or anyone else. Yeah, man, I agree. And that's why, like, really and truly outside of Sam Houston, I think the favorites have to come from those divisions. I mean, and I was asked on the Intel podcast yesterday, listen, I'm going to link that in the bio after the show. I was asked which teams that aren't top 8 seeds can I see winning it all. And I picked two. For me, I think South Dakota State and Eastern Washington would be my picks for teams that aren't a top 8 seed that could potentially win it. One, like I just said, man, South Dakota State has the balance. Pierre Strong at running back is a problem. That defense with Logan Bacchus and they have like 2 or 3 All-American linebackers on that squad. They're going to be a whole problem for people. They're physical, they're fast, and Chris Oladuncan is experienced enough to make some plays in big time moments. And then the other one, Eastern Washington, they were battle tested all through the Big Sky. They had to play Montana State, all these big tough teams in the Big Sky. And they also had arguably the best quarterback in the tournament in Eric Barrier. And when you look at the FCS playoffs, you need that superstar that can carry you through the biggest moments and the biggest games. And if it comes down to it, guys, and I say you have to make one throw, you have to create one play to win a game. I don't think many people are naming another quarterback that they would want to have in the tournament outside of Eric Barrier to make that play. Maybe you could say Cole Kelly. Maybe you can pick Chris and Eric Sam Houston. But for me, I think it has to start with Eric Barrier at least. And I think his experience, his dynamic ability to make plays down the field, I think that's what separates Eastern Washington from a lot of these other first round teams. So I agree with you. The Missouri Valley and Big Sky prepare teams for this moment. And personally, I think that's why they're going to be so hard to beat, especially in the first round. Lawrence said UC Davis versus South Dakota State is my top first round game. I have UC Davis over South Dakota State. Man, listen, I would have a tough time seeing UC Davis win this one, Lawrence. I'm not going to lie to you. I just don't know if for me, South Dakota State's a bad matchup for them because of the run game. I really don't think UC Davis is going to be able to stop South Dakota State from imposing their will. And I think South Dakota State's defense is just stingy enough to force enough turnovers to win this game. But I do think whoever comes out of this game, Lawrence, is going to be a problem for Sac State, because I really don't think Sac State, in terms of seeded teams, were really battle tested. And I really don't think overall, I think they're probably the weakest ranked team, in my opinion, in Sac State. So I think UC Davis and South Dakota State are going to be bad matchups regardless of who comes out of that game. Steve said, what do you think about the CAA only having 2 teams? Normally they have 4 or 5 teams, the SEC of the FCS. Steve, I really think, okay, so this might be controversial, and y'all can check me. Listen, I want y'all to have y'all's opinions. Y'all can check me if you think I'm wrong on this. But for me, I really do think that the Big Sky and Missouri Valley kind of pulled away from the CAA this year. I think outside of Villanova and James Madison, I really don't think there was a clear-cut third team that you thought could come into the playoffs and compete. I could be missing somebody, but for me, I think the Big Sky and the Missouri Valley deserve just as many, at-large bids as they got and just as many ranked teams as they got. And I think you could even make an argument that Eastern Washington potentially could have been ranked if they didn't get kind of blown out by Montana State just a few weeks ago. And so for me, I just think for Steve, Steve, you're right. The CAA is usually like the SEC of the FCS, but I really think the Missouri Valley and Big Sky have pulled away from them this year. When you look at Montana State, Montana, Eastern Washington, you look at a UC Davis, you look at a Sac State. That was the Big Sky this year. And then you already know what the Missouri Valley is. Do I need to really go down all the lists? I mean, personally, I really think Missouri Valley just it is that conference. It's number one by far, in my opinion. When you got North Dakota State, South Dakota State. I mean, even teams like UNI, that's 5-5, man. They might be the most battle tested team in the entire FCS this year, and they're 5-5 in the tournament. And there's a lot of people thinking they're going to beat Eastern Washington. So for me, I think that shows the depth of those conferences really and truly. And I think it was more those conferences getting better rather than the CAA technically falling off, in my opinion. Underscore said, I feel if FAMU had a slightly better quarterback, they have a better chance at winning out. Yeah, underscore. I think FAMU's good enough to win this weekend. I really do. I really like FAMU's chances this weekend because of their defense. But once you get to a James Madison, I think that's where the drawback of having a Rashawn McKay really hurts you, because I don't think Rashawn McKay is ready for that type of moment. And what I mean by that is he's going to have to play above and beyond what anything we have seen, what have we seen from McKay this year? He's going to have to carry the team because James Madison's D line underscore is so good. Bishop Bonnet's not going to be able to run for what he usually is, and that three-headed monster is probably not going to work as efficiently. So what happens when the entire game plan's on McKay's shoulders? Similar to how it was against Jackson State. And so for me, I think James Madison would absolutely give FAMU a lot of problems. And I think you're right that if they had a quarterback, if they had this is probably extreme, but if they had an Eric Berrier, if they had a Cole Kelly, if they had even like a Quincy Patterson or a Smid, they would the potential would be outrageous. I mean, even a Cameron Ward, man. Listen, Cameron Ward is so underrated in Incarnate Word, and I think that's another team that I think a lot of people are overlooking in this tournament. Incarnate Word, if they win their first round game, they get Sam Houston in the second round, and I'd be hard pressed to think that they couldn't give Sam Houston a run for their money in the second round because of Cameron Ward. Walter Harmon said 100 agreed 100%. EB is another in a long line of Eastern Washington quarterbacks who are the greatest players few have heard about. Listen, Walter, I think I know this might be an overstatement. I'm a huge Eric Berrier fan, so I could be a little biased here, but I think Eric Berrier has an opportunity if he makes a deep run this year and carries his team into the semifinals or even like a national championship appearance. I think you have to put him in arguably the GOAT conversation in terms of FCS quarterbacks. And I think he's already there now. He's in the conversation, but it would be a whole nother level if he drug this team all the way to another national championship appearance. And God forbid if he wins it, I think you got to say Eric Berrier right now, in my opinion, would be one of the best quarterbacks of all time at the FCS level. Underscore said right now I can't see FAMU making it past JMU. I agree, man. Walter, I definitely appreciate you joining, man. Listen, if you guys want to become a member, hit the join button, man. A lot of off-season perks coming. I've been in the works with those, but I definitely appreciate everyone who's joined. Crazy Criminal said I agree. Missouri Valley and Big Sky are the top two conferences overall. Coach Green said, do you think the Big Sky is top heavy? Potentially, but Coach Green, I don't think it's different than any other conference. I think you could say it depends on what you consider top heavy, Coach Green, because what I think it is more kind of I'm trying to find the right comparison for it, but the top is so good in the Big Sky that it almost drags down the bottom of the conference. So like in Idaho or someone like that is really diminished because because in my opinion, the Eastern Washingtons, the UC Davises, the Montanas, the Montana States are so good. So I don't know if you could necessarily consider it top heavy. I would consider that if you have 5 teams, 6 teams that every year can make a playoff run, I consider that a deep conference rather than a top heavy conference. I think a top heavy conference, in my opinion, y'all can give me y'all's definition. I think a top heavy conference is where you only have like 2 or 3 teams that are really good. But with the Big Sky, where you have 5, maybe 6 teams a year that can make a run, I consider that deep rather than a top heavy conference. But I'll let me know what y'all think about that distinction. But for me, I think that's more deep than it is top heavy. The Big Sky had 5 teams, the most in history. Coach Simmons says half the University of Texas football team is hitting the transfer portal this year. Yeah, it's going to be a busy year this year, Coach Simmons. I would not be surprised at all. I feel if Michigan beats Ohio State, they shouldn't jump over Cincinnati. They should come in 4th in the next poll. Lawrence, I have a tough time. I think with how good Ohio State's playing, I would be shocked if the College Football Playoff Committee didn't put Michigan at like 3rd or maybe even 2nd. I could see them if Bama doesn't look impressive against Auburn and Cincinnati doesn't look impressive against East Carolina on Friday. If Michigan wins that game, I really think, Lawrence, as crazy as it sounds, I really do think Michigan could jump to number 2 if they win this weekend, depending on how they win too, Lawrence. But if they win and Bama doesn't look impressive against Auburn, I can see Michigan jumping to 2. But I do agree with you that I would just put Michigan at 4, leave Cincinnati at 3, and then let the Bama-Georgia argument commence, because that opens up a whole nother can of worms on if Bama loses, is a 2-loss Bama still in? Some people say yes. I say hell no, that should never happen. A 2-loss Bama should not get in. But then the chaos really starts is what if Georgia loses to Alabama and then Oklahoma State wins out and is a 1-loss Big 12 champion? So you would have a 1-loss Oklahoma State Big 12 champ. You would have a 1-loss Michigan Big 10 champ. You would have an undefeated Cincinnati, a 1-loss SEC champ in Bama, and a 1-loss Georgia. Who gets in that situation? And sadly, I think if anyone got left out, it probably is an undefeated Cincinnati, sadly. Steve St. Felix said Cameron Ward is the Southland Offensive Player of the Year. Man, he deserved it. That kid had a baller year this year. We are family. They got all the fans and teams. I'm a rattler. What's the chant? I'm not sure what the chant is, Sean. You're going to have to ask Mr. Campbell or Urban or even Steve. I don't know what the FAMU chant is. I need to know it too. Let's see. The real question is, how much patience does Michigan have to keep Coach Harbaugh if he loses to Ohio State again? It's past recurring at this point. Man, he's never beat them. I mean, I think he's the losingest coach against Ohio State. I think he's 0-5, 0-6, something like that. If he loses again and you have a team like Michigan has this year where you're 1 loss, you're a top 5 team, and listen, okay, so Crazy Criminal, if they lose by 3, I think they have a little bit of patience. Like if you had a chance to win the game, that's fine. But if they get their doors blown off for what, the 3rd, 4th year in a row, the last close game was 2016. So that's 5 years in a row you get blown out. If they get blown out in the Big House with this team, you're looking at Michigan like, man, you might have to make a move because you can't trust anybody. You can't trust Harbaugh or any of this coaching staff to get you over the hump. And the number one thing you got to do when you're in a big rivalry, if you're a Mississippi State coach, you got to beat Ole Miss. If you're Ole Miss, you got to beat State. Alabama's got to beat Auburn. Auburn's got to beat Alabama. Georgia has to beat Florida. Florida has to beat Georgia. And so you have to win those rivalry games. And eventually, I think it's going to start counting significantly against Harbaugh. I think you saw the start of it this offseason when where they reduced his buyout and restructured his contract. But for me, I think Harbaugh at least bought on 1 more year, man, because of the crazy year they had. And now they're a top 5 team. And if, you go 11-2, I don't know how you fire him, but for me, I do agree that eventually you're going to have to make a move if he can't beat Ohio State, because that's ultimately keeping you from the college football playoffs. That's keeping you from Big Ten titles. And for me, I think that's detrimental to Michigan because college football is better when these blue blood programs are good. Let's see. Steve said no. That that Barrier is bad. Remember when Sam Houston QB Jeremiah Briscoe went back-to-back Walter Payton Award winners, 57 touchdowns in 16, 45, and 17. Absolute stud, man. JSU will win the transfer portal again. Michigan won't beat OSU. I agree, Sean. I just don't see it. EA said I can't trust Michigan in big games. Harbaugh's like 2-13 against top 10 teams. Yeah, he's had a problem beating Penn State, Michigan State, and Ohio State. And this year, I mean, I think anyone who watched the game saw Michigan was better than Michigan State, and it was questionable play calling, questionable substitutions for Harbaugh that ended up costing him that game. And on top of that, I guess I'll cover this topic briefly. Elias Ricks, 5-star corner, transfers from LSU. He's leaning toward going to Ohio State. So Ohio State is consistently getting 5-star recruits and 5-star transfers. And you can't have that happening. And Harbaugh's not recruiting on that level. So I think Michigan, if you lose this game by more than 7, a lot of side eye looks are going to have to go Harbaugh's way. Bama and Georgia are in. If Bama beats Georgia, I agree, Sean. They're not going to keep either of those teams out. Michigan has not beat the Buckeyes since 2011. That's brutal, man. I think I was in like eighth or ninth grade when that happened. That's tough. My dad wants Michigan to win. My grandfather wants Ohio State. Listen, Coach Simmons, you got to get. I don't know if y'all remember. This is such a weird thing to bring up. It was that Notre Dame Ohio State Rose Bowl in like 06, and it was the Laurinaitis family, and they had like a one team and like their son on the other. They had like the split jersey. You're gonna have to get you one of those this weekend, Coach Simmons. You're gonna have to get a split jersey. Sean said, we War Eagles are not ready to beat Bama. They have more ammunition after being disrespected in the playoff rankings. Listen, Sean, you see the jerseys in the background, Sean. You know that if anybody is going to pick Auburn, it's me, and it's not going to happen. Listen, I mean, with a backup quarterback, with how this team has been playing down the stretch, I got Bama big. Jamison Williams is going to be a matchup nightmare for Auburn's DBs. There's no way I can see Auburn pulling off this upset, even in Jordan-Hare Stadium this weekend. Who do you think should be the coach of the year, Smart or Fickle? Steve, okay, in my opinion, I think it has to be Fickle, man. I mean, listen, and I know everyone's going to say strength of schedule this, strength of schedule that, but when you look at Cincinnati and the recruiting classes they have, they took an average roster and Luke Fickell developed all these players from 3 stars, 2 stars into legit college football NFL draft pick potential. They have like 3 guys that have first round NFL draft grades right now. You have the winningest quarterback in FBS history. You go and beat Notre Dame, who's a 1-loss top 6 team right now. You beat them by double digits in South Bend, and right now you're sitting undefeated, and you were the first ever Group of 5 team to be ranked in the top 4 in the playoff poll ever. It has to be Fickell, in my opinion. I mean, because the level of difficulty is just so much different. Georgia has been at this level year after year after year. So, I mean, like, and yes, it's impressive, but it's the same reason we can't give it to. It's the same reason we can't give it to Saban every year, because I mean, you got to give other coaches. And for me, yeah, they do have 30 seniors, but Luke Fickell has coached all of them. Luke Fickell has recruited all of them. And today he even furthered his commitment by talking up an extension and staying at Cincinnati because he wants to be the coach to get them to the Power 5 level, and he has. So for me, I think Luke Fickell wins it or should win it, but I do think Kirby Smart probably still will win it, man. Sorry, my dog is all over here making all kind of noise. Michigan has beaten OSU like 3 times since 2000. Yeah, exactly 3 times, EA. They've only beaten them 3 times since 2000. Sean said, man, I know, Blue, we would need a bunch of turnovers. Do you think Tank transfers? I don't think so, man. Tank, Bo Nix, and Owen Papo have a real close relationship as the team leaders. And just a little insider info for my guys at 247 from Auburn. Papo is probably coming back. Him, Nix, and Tank, due to some injuries and things like that, have decided to come back together potentially and play one more year. So I don't think Tank transfers. He loves Auburn, and he's made that pretty clear. I'd be very surprised if he transfers, Sean, but you never know, man. Nowadays, things change daily in terms of the transfer portal. Crazy Criminal said Eli Ricks would be a great fit at Ohio State or Oklahoma. Yeah. Ohio State was his number 2 choice coming out of high school. Ryan Day needs corners. If there's one weakness for Ohio State, it is that cornerback room. They really only have 1 or 2 guys that are dependable, and Eli Ricks would immediately be the number 1 corner on that team next year. So for me, I think I agree with you that Ohio State would be great. Oklahoma would be huge. They definitely need DBs. Let's just put it like that. Underscore said, who do you have number 1 in the Heisman race right now? Bryce Young or CJ Stroud? For me, underscore, I'm putting CJ Stroud, man. CJ, like the performance that CJ Stroud had last week, I don't think people understand what he actually did. I mean, this guy had the number 7 team in the country down 49 to nothing at halftime. The number 7 team in the country, 49 to nothing at halftime. And had like 6 touchdowns and completed like 20 consecutive passes or something like that. That is insane production. And really and truly, since probably I would say the second half of the Tulsa game, he's been on a different level. And for me, I think right now I would have him 1, and I would have Bryce Young 1B. And I really, really do think moving down the stretch this weekend is going to be huge. This weekend and next week, this is the stage this weekend for CJ Stroud. If he goes out there and lights a Michigan defense up under Jim Harbaugh for 400 yards, 4 or 5 touchdowns, go ahead and probably hand him the trophy. But then also, Bryce Young has his Heisman moment next weekend against Georgia. You might as well just engrave his name on the trophy if he does that against Georgia, where he throws for 400 yards against Georgia's defense. So both of these guys have giant Heisman stages left, but right now I would have by a hair CJ Stroud over Bryce Young in the Heisman race. Sean, he's a pit mix, man. We rescued him. He's 2 years old, man. That's my homie. So yeah, it's a pit mix. I have a buddy at 247. His name is Carl Reed. He played football at Austin P. Oh man, that's dope, man. That's dope. Appreciate it, Mr. Moore, man. Thank you for tuning in, man. What do you think Ohio State backup Quinn Ewers does? Him and CJ Stroud are both freshmen. Listen, Steve, I was on the bandwagon so hard that Ewers was going to take this job no matter what. No matter what. But in my opinion, right now, I think it's CJ Stroud's job to lose. How do you bench CJ Stroud, Steve? I don't think you can, especially if he wins the Heisman, gets you to the playoffs, and God forbid if he wins a national title, you might as well wrap it up. What I've heard, though, from some of the Ohio State sources I have, and I have a few of them that live in Columbus and I talk to pretty regularly, there's a lot of talk that Quinn Ewers is probably, and I'm talking about it's likely, but I couldn't put a percentage on it, that he's looking at Texas to transfer. He's going to transfer closer back to home, go be, the savior of the Longhorns, and that if he transfers, he's going to go back to Austin, Texas, and go be the quarterback for the Longhorns, and that's a possibility. But for me, the way CJ Stroud's playing, I think Ewers more than likely transfers because I don't think he wants to sit behind CJ Stroud another year, especially at the level of talent that he has. He could start anywhere else in the country. And so I think right now, Quinn Ewers is probably going to transfer from Ohio State unless something drastic happens. EA said, I feel like Auburn still has a chance against Bama. Bama's looked very beatable these past few weeks. That South Carolina loss does hurt Auburn, though. Listen, EA, if Auburn would have beat South Carolina last weekend, they were up 14-0, collapsed down the stretch again, I would say Auburn has a solid chance to win. I just don't know where the morale of that team is. They blow a 28-3 lead against Mississippi State, and then they blow a 14-0 lead against South Carolina the next week. I don't know where their head's at. Owen Papo's banged up. Bo Nix is out for the season. Jarquez Hunter's banged up. They were missing their leading receiver in Kobe Hudson last week. There's a lot of question marks surrounding this Auburn team right now, and I feel like in a fully healthy Auburn team, they would probably be able to compete. But right now, man, with all the injuries, and the morale where it is, I would have a tough time seeing them pull it out. But if they do, you're talking about one of the best upsets in Iron Bowl history if Auburn was able to pull this one off this weekend. Lawrence said, who do you have coming out of the Big Ten West? Lawrence, I have Wisconsin coming out. I think Wisconsin beats Minnesota this weekend in Minneapolis. That run game has experienced a revolution now that they found a lead guy. Graham Mertz has been playing better. We had 2 touchdowns to 7 picks when they started 1-3. They found themselves 8-3. He limited the turnovers. He's been more efficient through the air. So for me, I think Wisconsin comes out of the Big Ten West and probably faces Ohio State in the Big Ten championship next week. James Jackson said, I want to see what Shedeur does next year. Do you think he can be the top QB in FCS next season? I wouldn't crown him the best, James. I would say he still has to prove it on the biggest stage. But for me, I definitely think he could be a top 10, possibly a top 5 quarterback at the FCS level. You still have a Cameron Ward. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I think Smid and Patterson both still have eligibility left. Those are going to be 2 guys you're going to have to watch out for. But he will move up significantly because Cole Kelly and Eric Berrier are both out the door. But right now, I would have a hard-pressed time putting him number 1. I definitely think he has a top 5 ceiling, though, in terms of next year, especially if that wide receiving core stays healthy this year and they don't have any suspensions or things like that. And they also add Quadarius Davis to the wide receiving core, plus whoever they add out of the portal this year. So for me, I definitely think Shedeur moves up, but I would be hesitant to crown him number 1 until I see the field. Underscore that ain't no saving that Texas defense. Oh man. Crazy Criminal said Ewers had a big head at South Lake Carroll. Thought he could just thought he could be him, but out in reality set in this season. Reminds me of Tate Martell or Justin Fields situation in college. Listen, man, I would be so disappointed if he was a Tate Martell situation. I think he has way more talent than Tate Martell did out of high school. But for me, I do think I think the whole enrolling early and just assuming you were going to come in here and take the job from like a CJ Stroud was a bit premature. But I think one transfer nowadays doesn't kill quarterbacks. You look at some of the best quarterbacks in the country, they've transferred. So for me, I still think this next decision is extremely important. He needs to go somewhere where he can be the guy and that he has the proper tools around him to really further his career. And Crazy Criminal, I'm going to throw out a school here. I know it's going to sound crazy. If I'm Quinn Ewers, I'm looking at Clemson. Clemson's whole problem this year was DJU just didn't pan out, and they were young everywhere else. If you bring a Ewers in there, that's an immediate upgrade at the quarterback spot, and other players are going to want to probably come play with him. If I'm Clemson, I am calling Quinn Ewers and begging him to come save me in Death Valley because that's what we were missing the most this year. So I think Clemson's going to be a dark horse there, but a lot of these teams are also in the Arch Manning running in terms of Texas, Clemson, Alabama, Georgia. And for me, I want to see how they balance that because there's a lot of people who think that Arch Manning is going to be better than Quinn Ewers. So it's going to be interesting to see how the teams balance that. Underscore Ewers is going to have to put 50 a game with that defense. What are your thoughts on Finley? Is he going to be the man at Auburn, you think? Possibly. Listen, I'm very high on Demetrius Davis, which is the true freshman quarterback for Auburn. I think he has the highest potential. He's the winningest high school quarterback out of the state of Texas. He actually beat Kyler Murray's record. He holds all type of Texas State titles at North Shore. For me, I think he fits our offense a bit better, but Finley's going to be good, man. I just don't know if he's going to set the world on fire like some people think. But right now, if Nix is healthy, it's Nix's job to lose. So Finley's going to have to wait his turn. I'm interested to see how he develops his pocket presence. There's times where I feel like he gets too jittery, sails passes, underthrows passes. I want to see how he matures. He's still a very young quarterback, first year in a new system. I want to give him some time, but right now I think he'll be a good quarterback, just probably not a great quarterback, James. If I had to put my money on it right now. EA said Texas fans clown the hell out of Ewers. It'd be funny to see him love him again. Texas would love to have Ewers right now. He said, I forgot about Clemson. That'd be fire. Steve says, should FAMU head coach Willie Simmons get an FBS job with back-to-back 9-2 seasons? I'm tired of these recycling coaches. Listen, Steve. Listen, you see, I thought y'all rock with me. Y'all are all supporters of the channel. If y'all keep mentioning Willie Simmons as a head coach at the FBS level, Mr. Campbell is going to have to put a bounty on my head. And I really like Mr. Campbell. I'm riding with him in the Cadillac to a FAMU game next year. But y'all can't be putting me out in the open like that for those type of shots. But in my opinion, yes, man. I think it's about time that he gets a shot. I mean, when you look at coaches at the FCS level, I think outside of the main ones like the Inces at North Dakota State and programs like that, I think Willie Simmons has earned it. And what happens this year if he goes and beats the James Madison and gets to the quarterfinals or even gets to the semifinals? What would that do for his legacy? So for me, I think Willie Simmons is going to be a real deal FBS coaching candidate moving into the future. I still think he's about a year or two away from being really, really vetted for a job. But for me, in my opinion, if a job opens up at okay, so this would be a stretch, but what if a job opened up at Coastal Carolina? What if finally Chadwell decides to move on? Why wouldn't the Coastal Carolina call the Willie Simmons and see what he can do? If a job opens up, even at a USF or a UCF, why wouldn't Willie Simmons potentially be a candidate showing what he can do out of the transfer portal and recruiting out of the state of Florida? So for me, I think that would probably be my guesses, but for me, I still think he's 1 or 2 years away, man. 1 or 2 years away for sure. He said, LOL. JSU, yeah, I saw that right before I went live. JSU did get a commitment from the number one JUCO DB again, so it's their second number one JUCO DB following Nugget 2 years ago. So Deion Sanders continues to do his thing. Listen, I'm probably going to make an episode on it coming up, but yeah, the number one JUCO recruitment, and also they're in the running for the number one overall JUCO recruit. I got a bias. I still all fans because he's D tackle. We really need D lineman really bad, but Auburn, Jackson State, and every top school in the country is in the running for the number one overall JUCO recruit. So Jackson State could have a huge, huge season if they can land him as well. Lawrence Reeves. Clemson still has a chance for the Peach Bowl versus Notre Dame. Wake Forest have to lose Saturday. Clemson beat Pitt in the ACC championship. Yeah, Clemson needs Pitt to lose, and if Wake Forest loses, they'll be going to the ACC championship game and set up a rematch. A rematch with Clemson Pitt, which was a great regular season game as well. So for me, I would love to see that. In my opinion, I think that would be a great game. But let me get to these last few comments. USF would be a great job for Willie Simmons 2-3 years from now. I agree. He said JSU needs to get a number one JUCO O-lineman recruit. I agree, man. I agree. But listen, I apologize for yesterday, guys. My Wi-Fi went out. A transporter blew. Power was out for a while, so I apologize. We will be back on Tuesday night, 6:30 p.m. Central. And also, if you're here, I'm doing something special, man. There's a lot of games to cover. Friday night, 6:30 p.m. Central Time, I will be doing another live stream live right here, and it's going to be a first round FCS preview. So I'm going to come live here, preview all the games, give my official predictions, let y'all give them in the chat, and we're going to have a big FCS preview live stream this Friday night, man. I figured that would be better, get y'all more interactive this Friday rather than just releasing individualized previews on top of all the other crazy games we have. So tune in. I'm going to post it on the community page as well. And so make sure to tune in Friday night if you want to hear all the breakdowns of the first round FCS playoff games at 6:30 p.m. Central Time. But listen, I'm about to hop over to Scotty's channel. We are breaking down film. keys, everything for the Southeastern Louisiana versus FAMU game this weekend. So make sure to tune into Off Script. In about 10 minutes, we'll be live there. And guys, I appreciate y'all so much for tuning in. I'll be back Tuesday and this Friday, so make sure to tune in. But until then, guys, the Blue Bloods are out.